Hello there, my friends. Dan Deigan here again. I figured I'd take some time. I'm going to apologize for starters because this video might get a little shaky at times. I wanted to take this time. I got about an hour drive on my way home from work every day, and I wanted to take this time to talk to you about the three principles that we're going to talk about in this week's blog. These three principles are critical when you're looking at becoming a high-tier, top 2%, really high-performing salesperson. Because if we take the three principles, the first principle of really being, failure and no, and education, I'm going to say, so let's call it failure and education. And, in essence, a lot of people say, well, it's failure is the first one. And I like to, disprove that a little bit by saying that, a lot of the times it's only failure if we give up. If we take every phone call and we try and learn something on it, try and get some education on it, it's not a failure because we've learned something and we've been able to educate ourselves and grow and develop and get better, right? So, for example, if you're on a sales call and that particular prospect says, no, I'm not interested, it's not a failure. Yeah, as long as we shift that thinking and turn it into an education and do something where you say, well, Mr. Prospect, I appreciate that. Hopefully I didn't catch you at a bad time. But why is it that you're not interested in even hearing what I have to say and you're sticking with your incumbent? And if you ask a question like that, you'll actually find that a lot of the times it's a very simple answer. Something as simple as you're the 15th person today that's called me. I've tried 2 or 3 other people to make something new happen. And all that's happened is they've let me down. You know what? And as much as my guy doesn't let me down all the time, he does let me down, but he doesn't let me down as much as everybody else. So that's the educational piece that I really want you to think about when we're going into this first principle. The second principle is starting to love fear, right? Now, anytime you pick up a phone to make a big call, or anytime you walk into a major meeting to make your presentation or whatever it is that you're doing, there's always that ounce of fear. Some of you that are watching this might have a fear every time you pick up the phone to make a cold call. You got to start loving that fear and maybe making it as a challenge, because the thing is, if you don't start loving that fear, eventually that fear is going to become, from a little pebble to a road, to a speed bump, then to a mountain, then to a wall, and you're just going to make up excuses and you're going to procrastinate selling. So you really got to start loving that fear, and maybe make it where, okay, if the fear is going to last 10 seconds, next time it's going to last 2 or 5 or 7, then 5, then 2. Because the thing is, fear is fictitious. I just saw this great video from Will Smith on YouTube the other day where he's talking about skydiving. And he says, having a couple of drinks with some of the boys and some buddies, and, we all talk about, hey, let's go skydiving because, we're all in that liquid courage kind of mode as we're coming into the evening. And he says, and all night I stayed awake thinking, oh man, skydiving, what are you talking about? And he says, we all get to the meeting point the next morning. Nobody's saying to each other that we stayed up all night thinking about it, right? And he says, and the funny thing was, they're all thinking the same thing, like, are we really going to do this? But nobody wants to step up and say, hey, I'm kind of going to crap my drawers here. I don't understand, I'm terrified of this and that. And he goes on with the story, and the long story short, I guess, is what I'm trying to make of it, is he goes through all these fears. He goes through this fear of when he's actually pulling up to the skydiving place. And he's got this fear of when he's walking out into the plane. He says, and then the fear subsides, and then all of a sudden, he goes, all of a sudden the plane door opens in a perfectly good airplane that's flying perfectly well, the fear comes back. And he says, you know what? All that fear, the second I jumped out of the plane, it was complete bliss. And that to me is like what happens a lot in a lot of our lives, is we fear this and we fear that and we fear this and we fear that. And then in the end, the fear that we had is completely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with what we just kind of been through or what we just did, and it had no outcome on what we were trying to get done. You walk into this meeting and you have this fear of the meeting, and at the end, it's a great meeting. You have a fantastic meeting. Everything happens the way you wanted it to happen, but yet you've had this fear, and it makes no sense. And the last one that we talked about is loving adversity. You know what? And I've got a lot of education on adversity, let me tell you that. I used to have a radio show called The Adversity Connection. I said, you know what, Dan, it's a great show. I said to myself, it's a great show. You know why? We're going to teach people how to overcome adversity. And we're going to teach them because we're going to bring experts in and teach them. And you know what? That radio show attracted more adversity to my life than ever before. And it was funny. So when I'm saying loving adversity, I'm not saying trying to attract it into your life. But when adversity comes, use it as an opportunity to make yourself better. You know, I don't know if you ever heard the expression, if it's not broken, break it and make it better. You know, a lot of people say, oh, if it's not broken, leave it alone. No, you got to make it better. Because how do we grow, develop, and build in our sales? How do we create a consistently, a reliable, predictable sales? We do it by continually growing. We do it by continually getting better. And we do it by continuous education, knowing our industry, knowing everything. So if we have adversities that we're, have to face in our business, if you will, those adversities, you got to start loving them and saying, okay, what can I do with this adversity to shift it and make it something good? How can I learn? How can I educate myself? How can I grow from this adversity? How can I turn it and share and help my customer get better? See, those three principles are huge when you're talking about really getting into that higher echelon, that upper valley of sales. So I hope this video helped you. I'm going to go back to driving here, and we'll see you next week, my friends. Remember, make every call a learning experience, enjoy the moment, and sell the hell out of every day.